Welcome to Stonewatch. This is the Retro Rewatch, and today we're talking about the 85 classic, Weird Science. And if you haven't already, please smash the subscribe button and click on that bell so you can notify for future videos. Be sure to give this video a thumbs up. And yes, this is episode 19 of my rewatch series. Now this time around, I decided to go back and revisit the John Hughes 1985 classic, Weird Science. Now I gotta say, I still love this movie. I had a lot of fun watching this movie again. Now I can't tell you like the last time I actually watched this movie. You know what I'm saying? I mean, but this thing brings back so many memories from when I was a kid. I was 12 years old when this thing hit theaters, and I remember going to the theaters and seeing it with my friends and loving it and having a grand old time. But now when you actually look at how much this thing made at the box office, you're like, wow, man, that's really not a lot of money. But being my friends, we love this movie, and I kind of remember this thing being more of a hit back then, but maybe I guess it wasn't when you look at the box office, you know, I don't know. However, I still enjoyed this movie, had a lot of fun with this movie. I mean, but there were a couple jokes in this movie that weren't as funny this time as it was the last time I seen it. I mean, I'm not really sure why that is. I mean, they felt, ugh. It didn't take me out of it. I still had a lot of fun with it. It's just like, ooh, you can't say that joke nowadays. You know what I mean? Weird Science is a 1985 American science fantasy buddy comedy film written and directed by John Hughes. The title is taken from a pre-Comics Code Authority 1950s EC Comics magazine of the same name, the rights of which were acquired by the film's producer, Joel Silver. The title song was written and performed by the American new wave band, Oingo Boingo. The basic plot of the movie is this: nerdy social outcast students Gary Wallace and Wyatt Donnelly of Shermer High School are humiliated by senior jocks Ian and Max for swooning over their cheerleader girlfriends Deb and Hilly. Rejected and disappointed at their direction in life and wanting more, Gary convinces the uptight Wyatt that they need to boost their popularity in order to get their crushes away from Ian and Max. Alone for the weekend with Wyatt's parents gone, Gary, inspired by the 1931 classic Frankenstein, to create a virtual woman using Wyatt's computer, infusing her with everything they can conceive to make a perfect dream woman. Model Kelly Emberg was initially cast as Lisa, but left after 2 days due to creative differences. LeBrock was hired as her replacement. Vernon Wells reprises his memorable biker character Wes from Mad Max 2, but is credited in this movie as Lord General. Filming began on October 2nd of 1984. Most of the location shooting was filmed around neighborhoods outside of Chicago, Illinois, where the rest of the production was filmed on sound stages in the back lot at Universal Studios in Los Angeles, California. Production wrapped on December 21st, 1984, and was released in the United States on August 2nd, 1985. As of 2013, Universal Studios was planning a Weird Science remake with the original producer Joel Silver returning and Michael Bacall writing the film. The film was set to attempt to distinguish itself from the original Weird Science by being an edgier comedy, in line with 21 Jump Street and The Hangover, which were rated R. The studio stated that the rating for this Weird Science remake was not certain at that stage of the movie's development. However, as of mid-2019, nothing of the remake had materialized. In 2017, Elon Mitchell Smith talked about a sequel to Weird Science starring Channing Tatum. A TV series based on the film ran for 88 episodes from 1994 to 1998, following the same basic plot of the film. Starring in this movie Anthony Michael Hall, Elon Mitchell Smith, Kelly LeBrock, Robert Downey Jr., Robert Russler, Vernon Wells, and Bill Paxton, just to name a few. Currently, Weird Science is sit with a Rotten Tomatoes score of 56%, with only 36 top critics reporting in. Now, the last top critic to do a review of this movie was July of 2022, and he didn't like it. Now, he said Weird Science describes itself as a special effects comedy, and it comes across more as a feeble blend of tediously vulgar, stale, half-baked ideas. So that guy definitely didn't like this movie. I'm not really sure. I mean, some of them could have been fully baked ideas, but then I don't know. I'm not sure if I actually agree with this review. Over on the audience side, it's sit with a score of 69%, with over 100,000 plus fans telling you what they think. Now, the last fan to do a review of this movie other than my video right now was November of 2022, and he liked it. He gave it 4 out of 5 stars and said it continues to be a good time at the movies, exclamation point. I mean, this is a fun movie too, as long as you don't take it all that serious, you know what I'm saying, and just like kick back and just kind of go with it. Now, I mean, again, some of the jokes were probably not as funny now as they were back then, but it was a totally different time back then, you know what I'm saying. I mean, you see people walk around in the mall and stuff like that, and a lot of the malls are actually closing down nowadays, or they're like outside now. So, and this is like one of those movies back in the 80s where they actually started using more and more computers inside and making it part of the story. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it just seemed like at one point in the 80s, like they weren't really there, and they just boom, they were in like in every single movie. Especially like, I think it was pretty much right around the 84, 85 time period. It just pretty much almost every single movie after that point had some kind of computer in it for something. You know, it was like part of the story. You know, remember War Games and everything else, you know what I mean? Now with a budget of $7.5 million and its total box office of $38.9 million, it's not a shocker that this thing did not get a sequel. I mean, obviously it didn't kill it at the box office. I mean, I think this thing became more of a cult classic when it hit like VHS rental and like was on cable all the time. I mean, every time you would be flipping through the channels on cable, this thing was playing somewhere like on TBS or whatever, you know what I mean? I mean, I saw that most of my viewings of this movie was like on cable, like flipping through the channels and it beyond, and I would just stop and I watch it because it's a fun movie. I mean, again, as long as you don't take it serious. I mean, Bill Paxton's in this movie. I mean, and then like you got the guy from The Road Warrior like reprising his role in the movie, and it was pretty like iconic scene, to be quite honest with you. And I think the bald dude, like he was in the rock videos. I think he was like in some of the Twisted Sister videos. I think that's like where I remember seeing that dude. I mean, I don't know, this movie was fun. I have to say, I don't know where I would rank Weird Science against all the other John Hughes movies that he's done over the years. I mean, the man has written and produced and directed over 30 movies for 26 years. So I'm not really sure. But if we were to narrow that list down to just the ones he directed, because out of the 30 some odd movies, he only directed 8 movies. So if we only go by the 8 movies that John Hughes directed, then I can probably come up with a list. And this is where I would rank Weird Science out of the 8 movies that John Hughes directed. Starting at the bottom of the list of 8 movies that John Hughes actually directed is She's Having a Baby from 1988. Now that stars Kevin Bacon and Elizabeth McGovern. Now I gotta tell you, I watched this movie like maybe once or twice back in the day, but it just didn't really appeal to me then. I mean, it probably would more now than it did back then, but right now, of all these 8 movies, I have to say this is probably like my least favorite. But then again, I have not watched this movie in quite some time. Maybe if I did a rewatch, I might think differently. But as of right now, this is at number 8. Number 7 is Curly Sue from 1991. Now this one starred Jim Belushi, Kelly Lynch, and Allison Porter. Now, I mean, I like this movie. It was pretty good, but it's your typical rom-com and stuff like that. But you throw the kid in there for a little bit more humorous storyline. I mean, it was a good movie. I mean, the main thing about this movie, this was the last movie that John Hughes wrote and directed before he died in 2009. I mean, I did like this movie, but out of these 8, this one's at number 7. Number 6 is 16 Candles, starring Molly Ringwald, Michael Scuffling, and Anthony Michael Hall. Now, I did like this movie quite a bit, but even though I was 11 years old when this movie came out, it always makes me remember my days when I was in middle school. Maybe because like towards like the 9th grade going into 10th grade, like timeline in my life and whatever, even though I was 11 when I saw this movie. But every time I saw this movie after that, it always reminded me of my middle school years. Maybe it's just me. But other than that, I mean, I did like this movie, but not as much as the rest of them on this list. I mean, but this was the first movie that John Hughes wrote and directed. And in all reality, it is a pretty decent movie. It's a nice coming of age like type movie. There's a lot of funny parts in this movie, but it's number 6 on my list. Number 5 on the list is Weird Science from 1985. Now, I did like this movie a lot. Like I said throughout this whole entire video, this thing was a lot of fun as long as you didn't take it seriously. I mean, a lot happens in the course of a weekend, right? I mean, the parents left on the Friday, the kids started messing around with the computers Friday night. Next thing you know, made a woman on their computer, and then they have a wild ass crazy party on Saturday night, and everything has to get cleaned up before the parents show up on Sunday evening. So a lot happened within the course of 3 days. I mean, but as long as you don't take it seriously and just go for the ride, this movie's a lot of fun. But for right now, out of these 8 movies, this one's at number 5. Number 4 is Uncle Buck from 1989, starring the late great John Candy. Now, I love this movie. I can't tell you how many times I watched this movie. This is one of my most favorite movies from John Candy. I mean, I can't say enough. I mean, I just always liked this movie. The kids in this movie were hilarious, and how he handled like the boyfriend of his niece and stuff like that. That was always funny. And this is like one of John Candy's best movies and stuff like that, as far as I'm concerned. But on this list, this was at number 4. Number 3 on the list is The Breakfast Club from 1995, starring Emilio Estevez, Paul Gleason, Anthony Michael Hall, Judd Nelson, Mallory Ringwald, and Ali Sheedy. Now, I love this movie. I mean, this movie was my high school, even down to the layout of the library. I mean, it was pretty much almost exactly the same. It pretty much looked exactly the same. And the clique that were in this movie was pretty much the ones that were in my high school. So every time I watch this movie, I just think about my days in high school for the most part. Now, I did have detention a couple of times in high school, but I never had to go there on a Saturday. And I'm kind of glad I never did, because that would be really boring to be there for like 8 hours or however long they were on that Saturday. I'm so glad I never had to do that. But on this list, as much as I love this movie, it's at number 3. Number 2 on the list is Ferris Bueller's Day Off from 1986, starring Matthew Broderick, Maya Sara, and Alan Ruck. Now, I love this movie. This is one of my most favorite movies from the 80s. I mean, it's hilarious. Every time I watch this movie, it's just downright hilarious. Now, I've been to Chicago, but I've never had that kind of experience when I was there. And I have to say, I did skip school quite a bit, or more than I'd like to admit, when I was in high school. But every time I did, it was never like this at all. I mean, if it did, I probably would have done a hell of a lot more than I actually did, which is probably a good thing. But other than that, this movie was a lot of fun. The parade scene is awesome. I don't know, it's just like one of my most favorite movies of all time. But out of this list, this one's at number 2. And finally, number 1, obviously, is Planes, Trains, and Automobiles from 1987, starring Steve Martin and John Candy. Now, I love this movie. I watch this movie every single year around the time of Thanksgiving. This thing is a holiday tradition. I mean, and I've also felt fortunate enough to where I never really was traveling on Thanksgiving to actually had to deal with this kind of travel BS. I mean, my last time I went to California for Star Wars Celebration in May, my travel was kind of all messed up, but it wasn't because of the holidays or what have you. So I don't know, but I can only imagine what it was like to actually try to make it home in time for Thanksgiving dinner when you're out of town for work or what have you. I just couldn't imagine actually having to do that. Now, I've been out of town for Thanksgiving, and I didn't even bother going home because the travel was such a pain in the butt. But other than that, I love watching this movie. The F-bomb scene in this movie is iconic. I mean, but that's a topic for a whole nother video. So out of these movies, this is the number 1 movie out of my most favorite movies, directed and written by John Hughes. So where do these movies rank for you? Let me know in the comments down below. So I don't know, man, at the end of the day, Weird Science is one of my favorite movies from the 80s, and number 5 out of the list of the movies written and directed by John Hughes. I mean, I had a lot of fun with this movie, as long as you don't take it seriously, you know what I mean? I mean, there's still a lot of good funny parts of this movie. I don't care what anybody says. So if you ever watched the movie Weird Science, let me know in the comments down below. Where does this movie rank with you out of the other movies that John Hughes has written and directed? Let me know in the comments down below. I mean, it's a good, funny movie. I mean, granted, it's a little crazy at times as far as like what they do in this movie, but it's still funny, right? So let me know what you think in the comments down below.